and welcome to the PhD Life Coach podcast. And we are back with another special double coaching episode, this time thinking about a part of the PhD journey that we often don't talk about. So all those of you who are PhD students who are trying to write your thesis at the moment, trying to collect your data, all of those things, your end goal is normally that hand-in moment when you finally have the big document. I'm holding it in my hands if you can see me on YouTube, except usually now it's just pressing a button to submit online. It's not quite as dramatic as handing over a document, but we're all sort of aiming towards that moment where we hand in. Well, today I have with me two ex-members of the PhD Life Coach membership who are both past that moment. They've both handed in their thesis. They're at different stages. I'll get them to tell you about that in a second. But we're going to be thinking about the challenges and experiences that come up post-hand-in for PhD students and what we can do about that. So welcome. Do you guys want to introduce yourselves to everyone?
Hi, I'm Lekhana and I'm a PhD student based in Sydney, Australia. And I handed in my thesis a couple of months ago, and right now I'm in the stage of waiting for my viva to be scheduled.
Perfect.
I'm Lena. I'm a PhD student as well. I'm based in London, but I was in Brighton for most of my PhD, and I did my viva back in February, passed the viva, some minor corrections. So I'm now trying to go through and address the corrections to be able to submit it for the final time.
Perfect. So we have two different stages, and they're both people who have been involved in sort of my coaching world in the run up to their vivas. And now we're going to think about how it's going for them now. So if you've listened to these double coaching episodes before, you will know how this goes. But for anybody else, what we're going to do, I'm going to ask Lena to turn off her camera and I'm going to talk with Lekhana first. We're going to coach and then we'll get Lena back on. It's a little bit like we do in our live coaching sessions where you get to watch other people getting coached. So once I have coached Lekhana, Lena will come back on again and let me know what things that she's drawn out of listening to Lekhana being coached, and then we'll swap over and do it the other way around. So you'll get to hear not only people being coached, but also people responding to being coached. So yeah, Lena, I will see you in a few minutes. Okay. Hey, Lekhana. So first of all, congratulations on handing in. It's so exciting to see people on the other side of this. How did it feel to do that?
It was a huge relief, honestly. I remember like I fell asleep like right after submitting. You can see the difference between when you sleep because you need to rest, and then there is this like huge relief, and you just know you don't have to set an alarm to wake up or anything. So that was quite exciting for me the first week after I handed in my thesis, and then started slowly building a routine around my free time. And yeah, it's been a huge change since then. But yeah, exciting.
Amazing. And I'm going to actually, I didn't warn you guys this. I'm going to make you guys do something that probably won't come as a surprise because we do it in the membership quite a bit. Tell me what you're proud of yourself for having handed in when you did.
I think the last about like 6 weeks, but just before I handed in my thesis, was when I was able to entirely focus just on the thesis without having to do anything else. And I actually felt like, previously I did not have this whole mindset of staying focused on one issue. And I would like really drift off and then be like, oh, I'm going to have lunch and then come back to this or anything. All of that, I just set everything else aside, and I was able to work through with my, all of these procrastination and like any of these worries, like, oh my God, okay, my thesis is going to be really bad. And, all of those kinds of thoughts, I was able to like box them up and set them aside and just get my work done. I think proudest, of course, it's been about handing in my thesis. That's been the top on the list. But otherwise, I think I am honestly really proud of how I handled my thoughts and like all of these issues that were coming up, which was slowing me down quite a bit leading up to the months before my submission. And that's something that I think I'm really proud of.
Yeah. I love that. I love that you're proud not only of the actual thing that you did and that you achieved, but also how you supported yourself to do that. Yeah. That's huge. And the reason I ask that is, and Lena, I'm going to ask you as well when say you can start thinking. The reason I ask is because often what happens, and you'll see this in the membership sessions, right? That when you're pre-handing, you think, right, this is the stressful bit, this is the hard bit. Once I'm handed in, that's going to be amazing. I'm going to be so proud. I'm not going to feel like an imposter anymore because I finished, da, da, da. And then the second we get there, so often, if we don't do it intentionally, it's like, oh yeah, yeah, I handed in, but now the problem is surviving the Viva. That was no big deal, just handed in. There was a
Yeah.
deadline, I had to, whatever. And now this is it. And we never allow ourselves to have that moment where we stop and go, no, no, hang on. I might not have done the next thing yet, but I have done that thing that I was working hard for years and years, and that I
Yeah.
was really, really worried about. So just taking that moment to go, I'm really proud of myself. I am so chuffed, and getting specific about it. What exactly you overcame, what you did to overcome it. Love that. So that's why I wanted to take that moment with you. And it's always nice. I always love to see members handing in. It's super exciting. So, how are you feeling about the upcoming Viva? What's challenging for you at the moment?
Um, well, I mean, I don't know when my Viva is actually coming up because my university still hasn't really set a date on it. And it has been a really long wait for me, and I'm not really sure what's going on. So that's something that's making me really anxious on one side. Yeah, just the wait itself is making me anxious, not even going the next step of thinking, like, what will the feedback really look like? For the first about like 5 to 6 weeks, that's something that I constantly had in mind. What if the examiners don't like it? Or like, what if they say that it's the worst thing I've ever read and things like that? But then it's come to a point now where I'm like, okay, what is really going on? Why have I not heard anything? And it's been about 4 months since I handed in exactly. And
Mhm.
that's really long to not have heard anything. So the anxiety is, of course, building up, but there have been other things that are keeping me busy, which is sort of helping me get my mind off of constantly thinking about my examination and
Mm.
stuff. But on the other hand, I've also, in our university, we do have this option of writing a thesis that includes publications, and which was the route that I chose back when I started. One of the things that has been like keeping me so low on motivation is that the papers that I've handed into journals, the turnaround time has been extremely slow, which is really like sucking out all of the motivation from
Mm.
me. And the more I try to do other things, like, my current casual job that I have, or
Mhm.
like whether it's even going to the gym on a regular basis, it's okay if it's getting my mind off of all of these spiraling about like my exam. I'll just do that rather than do this. So that's something that's been happening. And it's either I'm spiraling, sitting by myself, spiraling about all of these things and not getting anything
Yeah.
actually done, or I'm doing all of these other activities that are just my ways of exploring what could possibly motivate me to come back into
Okay.
this and yeah, try a different approach.
Okay. Perfect. Lots for us to talk about. This is good stuff. So, one of the things I noticed, and obviously you've been in coaching for a while, so this is a sort of slightly higher level concept, is there were two or three occasions, the way you described it, where you really outsourced your emotions,
Yeah.
where the anxiety was because of the delay, the
Yeah.
lack of motivation was because they were so slow. And one of the things I want us to try and understand a little bit more is what are the thoughts you're having that are causing those emotions? Because if you remember back to our self coaching model, and I'm going to talk it through for everybody listening, I know this will be revision for you and Lena, but for everybody listening, we have our circumstances, which are the neutral
Hmm.
facts of the situation. In this case, let's say the I don't know where my Viva is. Okay.
Yeah.
That's the circumstance. You just don't know. It's a fact. Okay. Then we have the thoughts we have about that fact. Then we have our emotions. And at the moment, your emotions are that you're feeling anxious.
Yeah.
Okay. So the two things I want us to figure out is what thoughts are making you feel anxious. Because it's not the circumstance of not knowing when your Viva is. There's a thought going on here that's causing that anxiety. And then I want us to also think what consequence that anxiety is having for you. We've already heard about spiraling, but we'll think more about that. And the
Yeah.
reason I want to try and stretch it out into this self coaching model, partly is useful for the listeners to hear us develop this and see how it works in action. But for you, it's so that we can better understand where these emotions are coming from and therefore take some power over them and
Hmm.
better understand the consequences of them so that we can decide what choices there might be to make here. Okay,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
So when you think about the fact that your Viva isn't booked yet, What thought make you feel anxious?
Yeah, the first thing that obviously comes to my mind is like, what will my examiners really have to say about my thesis? Because the final few weeks were actually a bit chaotic, and I was trying to speed things up, but I could not keep up with that. And towards the end, I couldn't really get like a detailed feedback that I normally would get from any of my writings.
Let's say it as a sentence rather than a question. So rather than what will they say, what are you worried they'll say?
That there may be major revisions, or that I haven't really expressed myself clearly in those chapters, or that, nothing really makes sense. That's like the worst thing. And also there is this possibility of them saying like, okay, this is not really good enough for a
Okay,
PhD. Every single thought
definitely.
that I have is like getting worse.
Yeah.
And then the other side of things is that I'm an international student here, and all of the other issues that come attached with it. Like, I have very limited time left to be here in this country, and then I would ideally prefer to have all of my examinations done, and also wrap up my revisions before my time's up over here. So that's something that's making me anxious.
So a lot of it is not so much around the fact that it's not booked yet, but more just anxiety about what the examiners are going to say, whether they're going to
Mhm.
tell you that nothing really makes sense in your words.
Yeah.
Okay, and then the other part of it is this uncertainty about timeline that comes a lot from you being an international student.
Yeah.
Yeah? Okay,
Yeah.
perfect. So one things I want everyone to notice is when we ask ourselves, hang on, what thought is actually making me anxious here? You get a much more nuanced response. So rather than like being, I'm anxious because I don't know where my viva is, we're anxious because you're worried about what your examiners are going to say. And we're anxious because of the timeline in relation to your visa and that sort of thing. Yeah.
Hmm.
Then suddenly, even that, even without thinking about what actions you take when you're anxious, etc., even just better understanding that gives us some power to start attacking these things, right? Gives us from here, I said, oh, okay, right. It's partly a visa thing. It's partly a worried about what examiners think. Right. What do I want to do or say or think about each of these things? Because I'm now understanding a little bit more specifically what it is that's wrong. Okay? I'm going to give you a really weird example of this. And I can't remember whether I ever talked about this on the podcast before. When I was little, like 5 or 6, I was walking to school, and I remember this so vividly. I was walking to school and I didn't want to go to school. And I was telling my mum I didn't want to go to school. And she couldn't work out. I love school. She was like, what is happening? So she couldn't reassure me because she didn't know what the problem was. I just didn't want to go to school, didn't want to go to school, didn't want to go to school. Anyway, she kept asking what exactly was wrong. And it was that I'd had a boiled egg for breakfast and I'd eaten a bit of the shell by mistake. And I was worried it was going to make my tummy poorly. I felt absolutely fine, but I was really worried that having swallowed this piece of shell, it was going to make me poorly. And so I didn't think I should be at school. I thought I should be with my mum. And once she knew that, she was able to specifically reassure me. She was able to reassure me, no, tiny bit of shower's not going to make a difference. Don't worry. It will come out the other end. You'll never notice. It's all good. Da, da, da. And then I was fine again because she was able to give me specific reassurance to the specific issue that I was having rather than a
Hmm.
generalized, oh, you'll be fine kind of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm not even going to go into, we already know your anxiety is making you spiral. When you spiral, you're doing less constructive things, I'm sure. So we don't need to go all the way down the model particularly. Let's look at the two things in particular. So this notion my examiners might give me major revisions because nothing really makes sense.
Hmm.
Does that feel true to you at the moment?
I think uh, uh, partly like I feel comforted because three of my major chapters, which like highlight some of my really important findings, have been with journals, and I've received some revisions for those. And then the fact that those weren't really desk rejected gives me a bit of
Yeah.
assurance.
Okay. So it's not
And
true that the whole thing doesn't make sense
no,
because
no.
there's at least two, probably three chunks
Yeah.
that are in pretty good shape.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. And the fact that gives me a bit of a reassurance that okay, maybe I may not be entirely wrong. But on the other hand, the other chapters, like the primarily like, my introduction and conclusion, which I work towards to more closely towards the end of my submission, closer to my submission dates, is when I couldn't really get like detailed feedback from my supervisors.
Okay.
And those are the bits that really worry me, because when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk to you today, I was also looking back at when all of the times that I've procrastinated before, and like where I've really felt low on motivation is when I've been extremely dependent on these external situations for, either for validation or like, to just get some sort of positive news. And right now I am in that phase where there is no feedback that I need to get from my supervisors in any until my examiners share their comments about my thesis. But unless that happens, there is nothing really for me to work on. And it's just things that I'm procrastinating on are like, okay, if I need to look for jobs, okay, I wait until like literally the last 3 or 4 days to start really stay focused on applications. And this happened with one of my other journal articles as well, where I had to send in the revisions, and it just took me so long. Like I did not wait until the last minute, but then every day I was able to work less and less, and I was able to I wasn't really being productive.
I want to see how these are all, because we're now talking about procrastinating job application. I want to see how these are all connected up. So you're feeling anxious because you're telling yourself that your examiners might give you major revisions and that nothing really makes sense. And when you've looked at that with a kind of a fair boss hat on, you're saying, well, it's probably not true that nothing makes sense. At least 3 of my main chapters are in pretty good shape. Maybe the intro and discussion, not quite so much. Before we think about what we're procrastinating from, I want to think more about, why is the thought my examiners will give me major revisions? Why is that such an anxiety-inducing thought?
I guess it's also, it has taken me so long, and I had to get an extension on my submission of my thesis. The fact that it has taken so long, I to this day, I really cannot sit with my thoughts when I think about like how long this has taken me and what all it took to actually get this thesis done, other than the last like maybe 6 months. There has been a lot of effort. It just feels like if I get any kind of negative remarks on it, I mean negative as in like critiques, I'm happy to handle. But if it goes to the point of them saying like, okay, this chapter is like, I just need to throw this out, it comes to a point where all of the work that I've done just completely feels invalidated and it's just trash.
Okay. So you said it feels like, I'm going to change that to, I'm telling myself that if I get major critiques on any of this, all my work is invalidated. Is that true?
I mean, that's something that comes up in my mind. I mean, I don't know if it's always,
when you stop and look at it, is it true that if you get major critiques on your introduction, let's say, that it invalidates all the papers you've written?
On some levels, yes, because, as I mentioned, the journals have been so slow with their turnaround that it does worry me a little bit. Somewhere it just it just feels like everything has been so stagnant for so long with me. I'm trying to produce work, but then when I get it somewhere, let's say, one of the first paper that I submit was back in 2023, and it's 2026 May, and you can imagine the amount of weight that's gone into this. And the second one was in 2024, and then I've been constantly getting desk rejections for that paper. And the third and the fourth one somehow weren't really desk rejected in the first instance, but I got some revisions, and it's been like somewhere I feel assured those are. It just feels like, because I haven't really had anything that says, okay, we accept your publication. The journal is going to, it's going to be out there. It feels like things have been stagnant for so long. And now to add to that, with my Viva not getting scheduled for 4 months, that has like added on, it just piles up with all of these things that have been building up for like 3 years so far. So yeah, this whole stagnant situation is something that's making me tell myself all of these things and putting me in this huge negative spiral.
Yeah, which is understandable, right?
Yeah.
And your supervisors have said, and it certainly reflects my experience, that the journal system is kind of broken at the moment. People don't have time to do reviews. People are more likely to decline reviews. It's very hard to get people to do reviews. Lots of very diligent people try to do them, but then it takes them ages because they're trying to do it effectively. It's really, really common. And I know that doesn't make it better. It is a massive problem in the industry. It's interesting then, though, when that becomes something that sort of, like stagnant waters, that sort of then pollutes everything else.
Yeah.
It's hard to have this sense of progress when that bit of it is moving so slowly.
Yeah.
So if we're in that context where this is not necessarily a marker of the quality of your work, but a marker of the kind of what's the word? The state of the sector, I guess. How do you want to treat yourself while you're waiting?
I try and be kind to myself. I don't say anything that's, I do acknowledge all of these thoughts that come up in my mind. But then there is also this part of my brain that says like, okay, that's not the reality. That's not, you haven't seen that email that says all of these things. So face the real situation right now, what's in front of you, and then try and work with whatever you can, do something constructive with what you can. Yeah, that's one side of my brain that's keeping me going, which is also one of the reasons why I try and keep myself busy by doing all of these other bits. On the one hand, like I end up going into this huge spiral. And also the other side, a third part is also that like I've never been good at planning for anything. Even if I do plan, it's been for a very short term, on a very short term basis. What if I actually mess up this whole planning in my mind and I can't really plan for anything? Let's just focus on the Viva, and like I can't really plan for anything unless I have my examiner's feedback with me. And what if that feedback actually, again, when I mess up with the planning situation of that, and then with all of these other, I do get into this vicious circle.
So many what ifs, right? What if this happens? What if that happens? What if this throws me off? And what's interesting is if you don't think you're good at long-term planning, at the moment, do we need to do much long-term planning?
Not long term, but at least I need to have at least a vague plan in terms of what I will be doing. I mean, for the bigger picture is that I know that I want to be in academia. I want to continue this. I want to continue working in academia. That's something that I know for sure. How am I going to make this happen is something, again, that's the one step behind that. And yeah, like the other side of which is where I need to like start looking for jobs and then start applying for jobs and how things might work out. But then I'm also think there aren't as many jobs. But then, when I start working on those applications, let's say about a week before the submission date, all of these thoughts again come to mind. Like, what if the fact that I still haven't had my Viva makes my application weak? What if all of this actually slows down my career? And what if I get major revisions and I actually do get a job, or like if I actually do get an interview, and then what if I have major revisions and that actually like affects my future prospects?
I just want you to notice how many what ifs there are here.
Yeah.
So many. And that's really common, right? When we're in these uncertain situations, what if this and what if that and what if this and what if that? And I think sometimes we ask ourselves those questions because we feel like if I could just predict all the things that might happen and have an answer to them, then I'd feel so much better. But we so rarely actually stop to answer the questions. So I want us just to slow down a little bit, okay? And say, What if you do get major revisions? Maybe you will. I have no idea.
Mhm.
What happens if you get major revisions?
I have to revise. That's probably the
We
only
do the
way out. Yeah.
revisions. Okay.
Yeah.
And what if having to wait to do your Viva and not having your PhD, what if that does adversely affect your job applications at the moment?
Well, yeah, this is where the biggest what if comes in, right? Like because I am dealing with something that's absolutely not in my control. At least, even if I do get like lots of questions that I need to answer in my Viva, which I'm may be able to handle that better than I don't know how many jobs are going to open up in for my niche research interest in the future. That's something that's not in my control at
So
all.
what is in
So,
your control? Because you said you don't know how many jobs will come up. And you said, what if this adversely affects me? That's not in my control. But when
yeah,
it comes to applying for jobs, what is in your control at the moment?
right now, the ones that I do notice, I have to give in my 100% and do my best with the application that I'm working on. So that's literally the only thing in my control. Yeah, I wouldn't know how my Viva is going to be, what my revisions are going to be like, or like how many jobs are coming up in the future. So yeah.
And you don't know how they will perceive someone who's post-hand in pre-viva in an
Hmm.
interview. Sometimes, if they've got tons of people, that might be something they use to screen out. We're only going to
Yeah.
look at people who have already done their Viva or have already done their corrections. They might, not gonna lie. Other times, though, they don't. Other times, they'll say, you know what, actually, we're going to go on fit first. And then, of the people who are the 10 best fit or whatever, we'll wait and see.
Hmm.
And if we have to wait a little while for them to finish, I've got several people in my membership who've been in that position where they've got jobs and the job has said, okay, we can wait 6 months or whatever for you to finish up because we want you. So, one of the tools that I want to really encourage you to practice is anytime you hear your brain say, what if, I want you to answer it. Because all of the things that you're what ifing about, when I pause you and say, hang on, but what if? You've got a really good answer. What if they do deprioritize me because, well, at least I applied. At least I've got the experience. At least they know I exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
What if other jobs don't come up? Well, I better apply for the ones that are there and wait and see what else comes up.
Hmm.
What if I get major revisions? Well, I'll do the major revisions and I'll look after myself through it.
Yeah.
What if it affects my visa? You've dealt with visa things in the past. I know it's a
Hmm.
hassle. I know it's a big challenge and everything. But
Yeah.
you'll figure it out, whether that means staying, whether that means going home, whether it means going somewhere else. You get to say, you know what? It will be a hassle. I wish I don't have to think about it, but I'm capable of figuring this stuff out.
Yeah.
It's almost that kind of reassurance of, yeah, it might. In fact, going back to my eggshell analogy, one of the things my mum said, and again, this is many, many, many years ago now, and I still remember, is, and if your belly starts hurting, you tell the teacher and I'll come and get you. Yeah. So it becomes, and if it does happen, I don't think, because we can't just, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, you'll be fine, doesn't actually reassure because your brain's going, yeah, but what if it's not? What if I do get major revisions? What if I do get rejected for all these jobs because I haven't got my thesis yet? But we get to say, okay, and if that does happen, I deal with that bit too. Does that feel true to you? Could you authentically tell yourself, whatever the examiners say, I'll figure it out?
I think so. I mean, if I have to go back and think about all of the times that I have actually done this, I have actually been able to handle myself in difficult situations. I think so. Yeah.
You've got evidence.
Yeah.
You've got evidence that you can do hard things.
Mhm.
Yeah. And we've also got evidence because we've seen it through the membership that you're getting much better at doing difficult things in a way that is healthy and kind to yourself
Yeah.
rather than doing hard things by just working 47 hours a day.
Yeah.
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 You've been really working and developing the skills to be able to get stuff done while
Yeah.
also doing your physical activity, while also seeing your friends, while also having some rest.
I think so, yeah, there has been evidence. I mean, at least if I don't have to go all the way far back, but just since I started the membership, there has been a massive change. So I think that's something that I should really look back on and reflect and yeah, think about like how I managed to do that, how I can apply that for now, my current situations. Yeah.
And it's okay to not want to have to. Okay. This isn't saying that it shouldn't be like you shouldn't be disappointed, but sometimes when we think about all the things at once and we either want to know certainly that they won't happen or certainly that they'll be fine, it's absolutely exhausting because you're asking your brain to solve so many problems. When in reality, when we can say, you know what, I have no idea how I would solve it, but I trust that I will figure it out and I will look after myself when I do.
Yeah.
And then if we can use that to kind of calm ourselves a bit, then we get to say, what's the one thing I need to do now? And I'll figure the rest out later. How are you feeling? People on YouTube will see you're feeling a bit emotional. What are you feeling at the moment?
Yeah, it's always emotional. Every time I think about it, it is. But I think I've gotten better with handling that as well. So yeah, there is a bit of reassurance that I have in my mind.
Cool. Lena, do you want to come back on? How are you
Hey.
doing? How was that for you?
Yeah, I'm glad my camera was off. I was getting really emotional. It was, yeah, I mean, I've seen Lekhana kind of recently, but it's been so emotional to see the journeys that everyone has been on. I've seen all the work also that you've put into your thesis. So it's just beautiful to see the journey as well.
And did you take any
Thank
lessons for
you.
yourself? Were there things that were useful reminders for you? I know you're at a different stage, but applying to your situation.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, off the bat, the blissful sleep after after turning in, I was like, I absolutely see what you're saying. No, I think broadly what really spoke to me was your anxieties and fears over the logistics of the Viva and the impact it can have on your personal life. I think that's something that I've really thought about in the last year of the PhD was I think the impact, the potential impact the PhD was having on sort of my personal life and being able to plan for the future and being able to kind of move forward. So that really resonated with me about the impact it can have. But at the same time, I found the conversation you were having about kind of being more aware about what we tell ourselves about the logistics and not necessarily just accepting these narratives that we tell ourselves, but that there is ways we can navigate the kind of logistics that you don't control. There is some way of moving forward, even if logistics are uncertain, but I do think it takes a lot of work and it takes effort to do that.
And that's tiring, right? And this is the thing that's always really challenging with this stuff, is this kind of having to manage your emotions, having to manage your thoughts and all those things is really tiring. So it's finding this balance between it's totally understandable that periods of uncertainty, these kind of transition periods, are stressful and being loving and kind to ourselves through that, whilst at the same time just making sure that we're not making them harder for ourselves by telling us things that don't have to be true. Okay, perfect. Lena, I'm going to get you just to turn your camera off and I'm going to have a chat with Lena. So thank you for that. So you are the other side of your Viva. So that's very exciting. Tell me what you're proud of. Let's do that first.
Yeah, I mean, I think the main one is kind of the standard. I think I'm proud of submitting of the document itself. I think it was quite difficult last year. I think when I went into the PhD, I kind of assumed, the first year is kind of difficult because you're figuring it out. The second year is difficult because you're doing your data collection. You don't know, where it's going to go. And I think that there's anxiety of, oh my goodness, if I don't get the data that I need, what am I going to do? And then I think in my little kind of roadmap, I wrote down, year 3 and 4 is like easy at that point. You know what you're
Just
doing.
write it up.
Just write it up. And I think that it was particularly challenging because obviously you're not fresh after 4 years. I think you've already been worn down by the years. And so I didn't feel fresh. I felt a lot more burnt out. And then there's the anxiety is, I need to write it up. I need to get this over the line. And I think throughout the PhD, it feels like there's always this there's always this sentiment of like, oh, I can just fix it later. I can just fix it later. But I found in the last year, I kind of got to a point where I was like, I either fix it now or it's not being changed or that's just not going into it. So I was proud of finally submitting and getting to a point where I felt comfortable that I was submitting it in the way that it was, that obviously there was things I wanted to change and there's a thing, but I was proud of having worked on how I felt about submitting and feeling that like I'm submitting it now. Obviously, if I started the PhD again, I might do it differently, but this is the journey that I've been on. This is what I have, and this is what I'm going to submit.
Yeah, I love that. And one of the things I often say is if you would go back to the beginning and do it differently, that means you've learned a lot since you started. Often people think that that's a sign that you've done it badly in some way. In my view, if you finish a PhD and if you went back to the beginning, you'd do it exactly the way you did it, that's a slightly weird PhD. You should finish it going, oh, well, if I knew all this, then I would have just done this, this, and this, and it would have been way easier. But then you would have learned different things, right? Even if you'd started from that point, you'd learn different things and go back and say the same thing. So that is a sign that you've just learned an enormous amount doing your PhD.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that was kind of the weird things in the last year is that it got to a point where I felt like I was editing someone else's work because obviously in the end of the last years, there's a lot less leeway to change things. I mean, like my case studies that I've picked, they were picked for good reasons, but they were picked kind of 3 years before, and then there wasn't room to kind of change those case studies. So you're sort of working with what you've got, and there's a lot. I felt like the more you go into the PhD, the less there's leeway to change certain things. So you just have to work with what you've got and kind of accept, well, I made these decisions 3 years ago, being more or less informed, and then you just kind of have to work with what you've got. So it's definitely a bit of a weird one by the end, and it felt like honestly editing someone else's work.
Yeah. And how was your Viva in the end? Before we get onto corrections, how was the Viva?
Yeah, it was really good. I mean, I obviously, like Lekhana was saying, obviously there's the fear going into it and the way that the UK system is set up. You don't get told a decision before. So I know in other systems, you can kind of be told whether you've passed before and then you go and it's more like a ceremony or kind of a public presentation. Whereas obviously in the UK system, you can go in there and it can happen that you can fail and they'll tell you on the spot that you failed. So as kind of what we see as our worst case scenario, but I think the discussion you were having with Lekhana earlier about like that's not necessarily the worst case scenario. You can work with what you get. But it went pretty well. I was surprised at the questions. I think the first question which threw me off was why did you decide to do a PhD? And I think I went into it, very like with all I printed out the whole thing, all my notes. I was, ready with a list of questions I thought that they could kind of ask me about, or kind of methodological questions, like very kind of technical points, and to sit down and that be my first question. And I was a bit like, oh, now I have to kind of like, why did I decide to do a PhD that long ago?
That's so funny. Sorry, before you carry on. That's so funny because I've seen that go in both directions, right? Because that's how I've done Vivas in the past and things. Starting out with quite open, why a PhD? Why this topic? Why did you think it was particularly interesting? So all my PhD students were very prepared for those sorts of questions because that was the approach I'd taken and the people that I knew took those. And then one of my very first PhD students, her first question was something like, on page 2 of your introduction, you reference the Smith et al. Paper. What exactly did they do? My student was like, you told me they wouldn't ask things like that. And I'm like, I didn't think they would. So yes, you can never quite tell what's going to, but you kind of roll with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just kind of a bit of a weird, and answering that question, because I hadn't really prepared that one, really. I felt like I'd prepared every question and for that one. And so I kind of panicked a little. And my answer basically was like, so I did my PhD on corruption, and my answer was that something along the lines of, well, when I was 5 and I watched Scooby-Doo for the first time, I realized you could run around catching criminals with your friends all day. It really changed something in me. And their face, I think it was also so left field from what they were expecting. And so I think we just stared at each other.
I would just be like, tick, pass. She passes, she's having a PhD. PhD in Scooby-Doo. Love it.
That's the comment I got after the Viva when it was announced to the department. My internal basically said, like, any Viva that starts with a Scooby-Doo mention 5 minutes in, it's going to be a good one.
I love that. Amazing. So, how are you finding doing corrections?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a mixed one. So it took a little bit for the report to kind of come in. I've had it for about a month now, and I have about 1 month until the deadline to kind of graduate in the summer. So I'm about halfway. I only started really working on the corrections kind of this weekend. So I've delayed it for about a month
Okay.
For different reasons.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to ask you about that delayed. Have we procrastinated it or have we intentionally decided to do it later?
A mix of both. I think some of it is logistics because now I've started work, so I'm
Yeah.
working 9 to 5 every day, so there's less room for that. But there's definitely some procrastination in there. I think I it was quite funny to me because I think you kind of pass the vibe where you think I'm a new woman. Procrastination, she doesn't know me. I can do the PhD fully. It's fine. And it was really funny sitting down yesterday in my old cafe that I sat. I pulled up my laptop and it was like, there she was. I opened it and I was like, yeah, I'll go check my phone. I'll go check my emails. Like, I think it's something that is such a practice that you have to do. It never really fully goes away, I think. But so there has been a bit of procrastination on that for different reasons. I think the classic sort of worry of I want the corrections to be perfect. So I'm holding back because I'm waiting for the perfect moment kind of
Yeah.
thing. But if it's this afternoon, I'll be in the best mindset to do these corrections.
Yeah.
Right now, it's not the best mindset. So that classic kind of reasons why I think we find it difficult to move forward with a PhD, but also an added layer of I think trying to hold back because it was a long process, but I decided not to stay in academia. So I'm working in the public sector now. And I think it's kind of unearthed a lot of big feelings about that. It feels like the corrections are the last thing holding me attached to my institution, the people that I worked with for 4 years, to academia in general. And I feel like there's a bit of sense of once I turn these corrections in, that will kind of be it. And I'll float away into another world. And there's this kind of fear and a bit of sadness, I would say, sadness and guilt as well about potentially moving on towards something else. So I feel like dragging my feet a little bit because I'm trying to hold on a little bit longer to the academia, but also the people as well.
Why guilt?
Guilt, I think because when I was at a university, sort of a year, maybe 2 years ago, and then a year ago, two times there was a position that was opened in my institution that I was kind of suggested, I think, to apply for, and I got on really well with the people at the university. I think there was sort of an expectation that I would take it, and they were hoping, I think, that I would stay. And so I thought long and hard about it, but I decided I felt like I'd done enough in academia. I felt quite burnt out at the time that I made the decision. I think if I was to make the decision now, I think there's more likelihood that maybe I would stay. But at the time, I felt like I've really given everything I have in this PhD. I don't feel like I can't take on a new research project. So I turned it down, and I felt I felt the people who would kind of were rooting for me to take it, I think were disappointed that I had made that decision. So I felt guilty for letting sort of not going in the way that I think that people want. And also a lot of guilt because I know academic jobs are very difficult to come by. I'm talking with PhD friends, they're very difficult to come by. So to basically twice have the door kind of very graciously opened to me when I know it's very difficult, and to turn that down, I felt like I wasn't being grateful enough, I think.
So to be grateful, you have to take up the opportunity.
Yeah.
Is that how you're seeing it?
Well, yeah, I felt like it was sort of, I think I've seen how difficult it is to get those jobs, and they come around quite rarely. And so it felt like I wasn't being, yeah, grateful enough for that it was a huge chance basically, and that it was a shame to not take up that chance. You should be thankful in a way that it's being kind of given to you.
But I'm just really interested. I know this is slightly different than the procrastination, but I think it might help a little bit. I'm really interested in this notion that you can't be grateful or thankful unless you take up the opportunity.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think that's a good point. I think it's because it's also tied to the the people, I think, and their expectations. I think if I had been, if I had potentially applied for a role in another institution and been offered that position, I would have maybe declined it. I would have maybe not reflected on it as much. I think it was also because I knew the people that I would be potentially working with, and I knew that they were, quite interested in, I think for professional reasons, they were interested in me joining, but I think from a personal point of view, they were thought, oh, it'd be nice if you stuck around. And I think so, yeah, having to go against people who I really admire and really respect and really value, going against their expectations was difficult.
Yeah. No, for sure. And I think that's really common, right? And we get this sort of sense of responsibility to other people. But one of the things I'd really encourage you and everyone listening to think about is you're not responsible for other people's emotions. You're responsible for your own behavior and deciding whether your behavior is acceptable or not, whether it's in line with your ethics and your values and all those things. But you're not responsible for their emotions because you're not in control of their emotions in any way. They might be disappointed. I'm not going to say that. I'm sure they were disappointed. But you get to decide that, okay, I'm sad they're disappointed. I'd rather they weren't disappointed. But I don't feel guilty about the fact that they were disappointed because I was straight with them about not taking the role. I was grateful for the opportunity. I thanked them for the opportunity, as I'm sure you did. I behaved in a way that I assume you think, at least you can tell me, that was in line with your ethics and values, that it was perfectly acceptable that if you at that stage in your life didn't feel like you wanted that role, that it's okay to say you don't want that role.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because we start acting really weird. And this is related a little bit to the letting go thing. We start acting really weird when we worry too much about other people's emotions. Now, this isn't saying you should just do exactly what you want, not care about others. We still want to act in line with our ethics and values. But when we start feeling guilty about the fact we didn't take a role, we are then, for example, often less likely to stay in touch, less likely to maintain other connections because we feel like we've upset them and that's all a bit awkward. So we stay over here, kind of thing. So I'd really encourage you. We can have obviously sadness mourning for the transition out of being a PhD student and everything. I'd really encourage you to think about what would I need to think and feel in order for me not to be losing connection necessarily, moving to a different phase of my life, yes. But what could I think, feel, do in order to retain some connection with these people that I like? What would that look like? What would that look like as an alumni rather than as a student or a colleague?
Yeah. I think I've tried it in different ways. It's geographically in a different location than I am now. So I try to come back to see those people about once a month, although it's been quite busy. But I try to kind of maintain kind of going down on a personal level or sort of messaging every so often to see how everyone is doing. Professionally, I've tried to, if there's conferences maybe that are being organized, sort of keeping in touch that way. And then I'm trying to work out how to keep in touch with academia in general. So my current position doesn't necessarily require any research, which is one of the reasons I think I went into it. I felt like I wanted to do something that was practical and less kind of research focused. But down the line, I'd like to find ways of maybe continuing to do research a little bit in sort of a different way. So not as kind of intensely, but sort of keeping it on the side. And I would like to eventually sort of publish the PhD as well. So there is that sort of, there's going to be that need for connection anyway. If I want to go down that route, I'll probably will have to talk to my supervisors about it again, et cetera. One thing I wanted to talk to you about is I feel like participating in academia seems very binary. You're either a student or you're teaching or you're not, and you're outside of it. And I don't see a lot of instances of participating in academia in less of a sort of such a binary way. And yeah, I'd love to hear your thoughts on ways of participating in academia that aren't sort of, I'm a student, I'm on faculty, but there must be other ways to kind of contribute to that from more of an external point of view.
Yeah, no, for sure. And it's challenging, not helped by the fact that I'm in this situation at the moment. So anyone out there listening who wants to give me an honorary position, get in touch. I don't have access to journals at the moment. It drives me wild because I don't have an official university affiliation anymore. So anytime I want to read, because I try and stay evidence-based, not so much in my discipline, but more in the stuff I'm doing now, I have to message, you'll see them pop up sometimes on community. Anyone download this for me? Or I contact like old colleagues or whatever to find stuff for me. So there is that barrier for sure. Writing up PhDs, post a PhD, but when you're not in academia, is more common. You do have to decide essentially that you're doing it as a hobby, that you're essentially doing it because you want it to exist, because you're enjoying being part of it, because it's something that, unless you're going to get an academic role in order to have time to do it, it's something that's always going to be on the side of that. Your old institution might be able to give you an honorary position to give you access, an honorary research assistant or something like that during the process if you're still collaborating with your supervisors about it. Otherwise, it will be your supervisor's responsibility to make sure that you've got access to the references and things that you need. There are more and more kind of slightly crossover conferences, depends a little bit on the field, but because certainly in the UK universities are being encouraged to do more impact work, there's more crossover events between academia and the parts of the world that use that academia. So I don't know, and I don't go into now, but thinking about, are there any overlaps with what I'm doing in my role and my old interests? And are there ways that that could yield any interesting things? So, for example, to use other people's examples, we have people who do a lot of research about sustainability and things like that, but then they will go to more industry focused conferences where it's thinking about sustainability in specific contexts and those sorts of things. So there are those sorts of things. It's not necessarily a straightforward route, and it is a route that, as I say, will usually be kind of pro bono as a hobby work more than anything else, because we all know you don't make money out of university academic books. The other is thinking very seriously about what sort of book you would want to write. I'm assuming from your topic you're talking book rather than papers. I could be wrong, but if you were talking book, the other option is whether, particularly get your topic's quite an interesting topic, whether it's something that could be a more general release type book that you would write for publication.
Yeah. Yeah, no, absolutely. I think those are really good points. I have come across a few conferences that are coming up that I've been meaning to kind of talk to my line manager at work and kind of thinking, do we have any involvement in that? And is there a way that I can sort of participate in that?
Because I do wonder whether getting creative about some of these thoughts might help a little bit with this is the end of my PhD procrastination. Because if we can reframe it as, yeah, this is the next major hurdle that I want to get over, but it doesn't have to be the end of my connection to the university, the end of my connection to the people, the end of my connection to my research, then it starts becoming, yeah, it's the end of a phase, but I'm coming into a new phase. And that might help with some of that sadness.
Yeah.
I think the bit that will become clear over time, and I would encourage you to allow yourself to let it become clear, is which bits do you miss? So I left academia 3.5 years ago now, and I love going back to campus, love seeing the people, love swanning around campus because I love our university, I love the people, I love the collegiate feel. I love reading some elements of academic research and thinking about how I can use them in my practice. I do not miss doing research on any level. And if anybody contacts me to ask me if I want to do a research project with them, the answer is no. Thank you for asking. Love you lots. No, don't want to. So at the moment, you're probably feeling a bit nostalgic about the whole thing. But as you get a little further away from it, I'd encourage you to try and really tease apart which actual elements is it I miss those specific people, in which case how can I still have them in my life? Do I miss that team sense, in which case how can I generate that more in my current role? Do I miss the actual reading of research, the actual doing of what bits do I miss? Because it might not be all of it.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's a really good point. I think it's been sort of just such a jarring process switching between academia to kind of a full-time job. Even just practically, I mean, I have a 9 to 5. I had to count my annual holiday days, which I was like,
Wow. Yeah.
oh my goodness. I'd never had to do that
Yes.
before, obviously, as a PhD, or even just having a line manager, having someone that you report to. I think one of the joys and also issues, or difficulties with a PhD is that you're your own boss, really. So you explain to your supervisors what you're doing, but on a day-to-day, you don't have to kind of give reasons on what you're doing to someone. And I think what's been difficult as well, just the change in community as well. I mean, I spent probably about 6 to 9 months co-working in the membership every day with the same people, sorry. And to then not have that anymore is a huge shift. We had a catch-up call yesterday, and we were chatting for like 3 hours trying to kind of, but there's so much to say. So we're seeing that world kind of go by as well. I mean, I know the membership is still going. I was this close to continuing, and then I thought, well, I could have stayed for the corrections, but I thought, well, it's harder to join the sessions now, but it's sort of really lovely to see new people join. And I feel like I'm like, yeah, watching from outside the
And if you want to sneak in for a correction, quickly we closed, but I'd let you back in. But seriously, with that though, that is again a gorgeous phase to be in. I love that the co-working meant so much to you and you've met these amazing people and everything. I love that you all had a catch up. That's amazing. But that tells you something about what's important to you and what sorts of communities you find useful and fun. And it's also given you some skills because you were part of creating that, right? You didn't just show up to these sessions, you organized some of them and things as well. You were part of creating that welcoming environment. You guys are all over the world, you're all doing different topics. It didn't come together by chance, it came together because you and a few others created it. And so you've got those skills. And so I think for you and for anybody listening who has these sort of nostalgia over what was, really thinking, okay, that tells me something about what's important to me. It doesn't have to be that, although, like I say, very welcome back for your corrections if you want to. But it doesn't have to be that. But I'm capable of keeping those relationships going outside the context of the membership. I'm capable of creating these sorts of connections, maybe not in the same way, maybe not with the online working, but maybe. But I'm capable of creating these. What would that look like in my current employer's context? How do I use the skills that I got from building that community to feel more part of something where I'm working? It's sort of the things we miss tell us what things we want in the future.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting from a sort of a personal point of view, but I think from an academic point of view, I think that's really, really interesting because I think academically, I felt like I spent a lot of time kind of identifying what wasn't working for me in academia. And I think it's a broader conversation about how academia is and how it treats different people and the different challenges that different people can have in academia, but maybe seeing what I miss. Yeah, like you said, highlights, I think, the good bits of academia and the opportunities that you get from it. And obviously, I think it's a lot easier once you kind of move on to something else to look back and think, oh, but I really liked that. Obviously, when you're in it, I mean, I was so excited to finish and kind of move on. But yeah, now I look at it maybe with a little bit of a kinder eye.
And we get to do both. That's the joy, right? We get to think, because I'm having to do this. Okay, I don't know whether, certainly lots of people on the podcast won't know. I don't know how much you know, but when I left academia to start this, not only did I leave academia, I left the city that I was living in to move back to where I grew up. Until about a year before that, I had been single for years and years and years and years and years and living a very engaged and vibrant pre-2020. That was complicated, but pre-2020, very vibrant, very busy, very lots of things going on, lots of different hobbies, lots of different networks, life. And I moved to a village with my wonderful husband. So I was away from work, I was away from my everything. And it has been, and it's still, 3.5 years later, it's still a transition. But you get to do two things. You get to recognize, one we've talked about already, you get to recognize what bits you miss and how can you recreate them in your next bit of life. And then the second thing is how can you value the things you had then that are now not compatible with what you have now, but you value the fact you had them. Okay? Because I can tell you, when I was then, if you were telling me that I would have a gorgeous, wonderful husband, I would be the happiest happy person in Happy World, you know? Many of my shenanigans were trying to find that person. Many of my comedy stories come from that. And so a lot of what was fun and I miss in inverted commas from then is not compatible with my current life. I don't have comedy dating stories anymore. But I can look back and love that for what it was and love what I have now. But I can also figure out what are the bits. I want comedy stories of silly things I've done. So I'm trying to reinsert that back into my life, if you see what I mean. And so it's sort of thinking, which bits can I and do I want to replicate? And which bits do I want to just really revel in the joyous memory that I had that phase of my life, rather than telling myself I should have all of that now.
Yeah.
Because we definitely had conversations about how much you wanted your thesis done, you wanted a salary, you wanted to be stable. We definitely had that conversation.
I mean, I love it. I mean, it's great. That aspect I really value, and just the kind of the freedom that comes with being a bit more independent on that front. I think, yeah, I do really value. I mean, I stick with the decision. I think it was the right decision to try something else at this stage in my life. When I decided to do a PhD, a lot of it was because I felt like academia would be something that I would want to do at the end of my career, but I just didn't see myself doing a PhD later in life, which now I have different opinions on. I think I see more value in that than I did when I was 23 when I started the PhD. So it felt like, oh, I don't want to do it later, but I see the value now. Also, I have a kinder eye, I think, and I think there is so much value about doing a PhD later in life, in my opinion. But yeah, it's definitely been a process. But I stick. I think it was the right decision.
You make it the right decision. That's what you get to do. I wouldn't even say I think it was the right. It was, because it was the decision you took. So it was the right decision. You get to make it the right decision now. And if in however many years you're like, you know what, I'm ready to make a different decision now to go back into academia or to do something completely different, great, we can still make it. It doesn't become an irreversible decision. But for now, for the amount of time you've decided you'll stay in your current role, I think it's really useful to tell yourself it was just the right decision. And I'm going to make it the best decision ever.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, although I'm sad we didn't get funny comedy stories as a standalone session in the coaching. I think you're sitting on something.
I've been hiding all the dating stories. I'll write a book one day. On that, Lena, come back, save me. My dating years were the Facebook generation, and I was terrible for sharing way too much in my status.
We've all been there.
So I live it through my Facebook memories. You know, when you log on, it's like 15 years ago today. Vicky never expected blah 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 blah. So I just entertain myself like that these days. So how was that for you, Lena?
Oh, really nice. I think it gave me a few things to think about as well. Like when Lena was talking about all of her experiences so far, and it's quite interesting to see like how you made this decision, and you're also like trying to still hold on to this academic life. I just started thinking about like, okay, I just built this whole PhD around like wanting to get into academia because that's not something that I had a background to do before the PhD. So yeah, it was quite interesting. Not just now, but like any coaching sessions that I've been a part of before, it's always like interesting to look at, okay, there is something that I can so relate to with everything that everybody speaks about. So it's quite nice. Yeah.
Definitely. And we've ended up, I told you guys we'd be done in way less time than we have been. This is the problem when I coach people that I know and have cared about for a long time. But it has been absolutely gorgeous to see you both. It's gorgeous to hear that you guys stay in touch and everything. And thank you everyone for listening. And I will see you next week.